People who made a marriage pact with someone like, if we're both single by the time we're 40, let's get married, and went through with it. How did it go? I on and off dated a wonderful woman for a few years. Commitment was always kind of on, off, and we both dated other people during this time. Things were exacerbated by us both being single parents. Mine were quite a bit older than hers. Even though she was older than me, we were always quite close. When we were dating we'd talk about our respective partners. No jealousy whatsoever. We ended up as FWB for a while. One night speaking on MSNIIRC we made a pact that if we both hit 40 and neither of us were married then we would get hitched. To be honest, for quite some time I thought we actually would get married. During one of our drier spells, I was at her house fixing her washing machine and her sister popped in to say hi. Well, not only did she look amazing, but I could tell she was checking me out. But I left it at that. More talking online and I joke with her that I'm going to bed her sister. And she jokes back that I should try if I want. But that her sis is married and very happy. Turns out, not as happy as everyone thought. Very abusive husband. Very long story cut short. I've been married to her sister for 4 years now. She did not take the news well to start off with. But that's mostly because I broke the news in such a cuntish way because I was drunk and thought it was funny. We all get along like a house on fire. Her parents after the initial shock have been wonderfully accepting, as has her whole family. I'm lucky to be a part of it. In my early 20s, I would hook up with this chick here and there. We were actually pretty good friends. But we never really hung out outside of social groups. Which is a shame. She was fun as hell and we always kind of found ourselves in the corner ignoring the group. Anyways, we made a pact that if we weren't in a relationship by 30, we would get married. Turns out she got back with her ex. It's been 10 years. And she reminded me of our marriage pact. I had completely forgotten. We're both married now. To other people. We still talk here and there. And sometimes she tells me that she thinks we would have made a great couple. So I worry that she's not too happy where she is. I haven't seen her in person in years. We're both 35. She's married. 2 kids. Stay-at-home mom. Great husband. He just works about 80 hours a week. I am married. No kids. Wife is full-time student. I work full-time. We have the ability to up and move and do whatever short of grad school. We travel when we can, which is pretty frequently. We just up and moved to another state for my wife to start her grad school program. Grass is greener. Ya know, I mean, for both of us. I have wondered where my life would be if I was to get married and have kids when I was younger. I'm sure she wonders about traveling the world at the drop of a hat, and not being tied down to any place in particular. We both reminisce about the easier days of when we worked together, would make money on a night shift at the restaurant, and would go blow it at the bar hanging out with everyone. And we have never really stopped chatting. I was invited to her wedding. Her husband knows we chat. My wife knows we chat. Yeah. We made a pact when we were 18 to get married if we were both single at 30. We were not dating. Jumped the gun a bit I suppose. And married at 24 years old. 7 years and 3.5 kids later and I don't regret it one bit. My wife said she made this pact with a guy who took it seriously I guess. We went to high school together so I know of him and he randomly calls 10 years later and asked my wife if she is still with me. She said yes and he hung up and we haven't heard since lol. That I know of anyway always that 1% chance of something. I made a baby pact with a friend i.e. if I hit a certain age that I now can't remember he would impregnate me. I knew we wouldn't be good together romantically. But he was a solid best friend and would have been a great dad. It was also a safety net for me that helped me leave an abusive relationship. I had been convinced that no one else would ever love me and I'd never be a mom. Anyway, he ended up introducing me to my now husband who I have a child with. While he is married to someone far better suited to his personality than me. So I'd say it worked out for the best for everyone. My best friend growing up and I made this pact. We were 13 to 14 at the time. The pact was if we didn't marry anyone by 30, we would marry each other. A few years later, we moved it to 25. By the time we were 19 to 20 we started dating. We got married at 22. Just celebrated our 3rd anniversary. We're married with a newborn. When we were both 19 when we made a pact to marry each other at 35 if we're both single. We started dating at 24. Married at 29. And now with a newborn at 31. My friend and I got drunk one night and said if we're single in 5 years let's get married. 5 years later we got married, dated for 2 years before that. Just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary and have a baby girl and an amazing life. I've made a pact with 2 people and neither of them know. Had this happen with a best friend of mine. She said if both of us were single at 35, we'd get married to each other. 2 years later, I ask her out. She is taken aback, ghosts me for a year, then invites me to her wedding. I had no hard feelings, so went anyways. I find this frequently asked question fascinating because until I encountered Reddit, I had never heard of this practice. I made a marriage pact with a friend when we were approximately 10. If neither of us were married by 25, we would get hitched. She became a massive drug addict, and I'm dating someone much better, so bullet dodged. I had an uncle who did this with a girl for when they turned 35. They turned 35 and laughed it off but ended up dating instead. A few years later they got married. I think most who do it are already interested in the other. They just don't want to admit it yet. They made the deal in college. They barely kept in touch after college. However, she moved back to the city and met back up through old friends. That's when they began to get closer and joke about the whole 35 thing once more. For his birthday, instead of having party, he just invited her out for dinner, which led her to joke, "Oh, are you going to propose?" And they laughed. But during dinner they started discussing what it would look like if they started dating. Within the month they began. Not me but my great-grandparents who adopted my grandpa. I didn't get to know them as much as I would like, but this is a cute story. Great-grandpa J and great-grandma S were sweethearts since kindergarten and dated all through high school. I don't remember exactly what happened, but she moved away. Rumor is that she worked as a chef in the White House. Before she left, they amicably split, as long-distance relationships in those days were pretty much impossible. They agreed that if they ever saw each other again, and they weren't already married, they would get back together. Well, time passes and he marries his first wife, don't remember her name, who was a Serbian lady who had MS, or some other terrible disease. He took care of her for many years before she passed. When he remembered her, he joked about how she watched so much TV, as she was immobile, that she knew all the names of the football players and kept track of all the big games, and he thought that was cutest thing. After she passed, one day he runs into S again, in the supermarket, and they talked, and he asked if she was married, and yes, she had married a veteran called G and was very happy. Some time passes and G passed away as well. She found him in the phone book and they reunited, both missing their lost loves, and fell in love with each other all over again. They got married not long after and adopted 2 kids, and were happy until she eventually passed away. She always said that she would come back as a monarch butterfly. They kept a huge garden in the backyard and the butterflies would stop on their migration to Mexico. The next time the butterflies came through after she passed, one of them came to land on his hand, and stayed for a few minutes, before she flew off. And one of them does this every year that they return. I was very isolated from family growing up and estranged from their adopted son, my granddad, and I never thought they much cared about me until we found Jay again and they had a picture of me on the mantle. And I'll never forget that. He still hadn't cleared out S's old things, so we helped him until we moved away. And he gave me S's nearly 100-year-old violin, and I restrung it, and it has an absolutely gorgeous sound to it. I did this with a friend when I was in my late teens, early 20s. We said we would get married at 30. She was gay. I was straight. I moved for university and we saw each other less and less and eventually drifted apart. I don't go back to my hometown very often, but the last I heard, about 8 or 9 years ago, she had become a nurse, found a husband and had a kid. I'm 36 now and I don't feel like I have grown up one iota, and I haven't had a relationship that has lasted longer than 3 months. I try not to measure my life against the traditional metrics of marriage, money and kids, but I sometimes feel like I have done things very wrong. I made this pact with my best friend in high school. Several years down the road we ended up being together, but long before the time frame was up. We will be married next year. I now, late 30, SF made a joke marriage pact with a gay male friend back in '99 or so, before gay marriage was legal. Promised to marry before 40. We both got married this year, to different men with the same first name, so, not quite what was asked, but we're amused. He's gay now. Always has been. Best friend since we were really young. Always had crushes on each other off and on. In high school, our timing was awful and we never ended up dating, but we did make a marriage pact. If we were both single at 30 years old, we'd getting married. Some years passed. We moved away from each other, grew distant, dated other people. Long story short, we're now back in each other's lives and I'm reasonably sure we're going to make good on the pact earlier than originally anticipated. Made this agreement at 16 to marry at 35. We started dating at 26. And it'll be 2 years next week. She wants to get married a little earlier than 35 now. When we were 25, one of my best friends and I decided that at 35 we'd get married if we were still single. She moved back to the same town I lived in a year later and I realized I loved her too much to wait until 35. Been together 2 years now. We're getting married next week.